While babysitting, I asked my sister, "When does Mom get out of the hospital?" She said, "She's not sick. I've been poisoning her for the inheritance." The remote control slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. My nephew Danny barely glanced up from his coloring book, but every muscle in my body had gone rigid. Veronica stood in the kitchen doorway, still wearing her scrubs from another 12-hour shift at the medical center, her auburn hair pulled back in that messy bun she always wore when exhausted. She was stirring something in a small glass, the liquid pale yellow and slightly cloudy. Her expression remained completely neutral, as if she'd just mentioned the weather or asked about dinner plans. I tried to form words, but nothing came out. The living room suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing inward, while afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to this impossible confession. Danny hummed quietly while coloring a dinosaur purple, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother had just admitted to attempted murder. The sound of his innocent humming mixed with the gentle clink of Veronica's spoon against glass created this surreal soundtrack to the most horrifying moment of my life. Mom had been in St. Mary's Hospital for 3 weeks with what doctors called mysterious organ failure. Her kidneys were shutting down, her liver showed signs of severe damage, and her neurological function was deteriorating rapidly. The specialists couldn't identify the cause despite running every test imaginable. They'd mentioned possible autoimmune disorder, rare genetic condition, or environmental toxin exposure. I'd spent countless hours in that sterile waiting room, holding Mom's hand while she drifted in and out of consciousness, watching machines monitor her failing body. Veronica walked closer, still stirring whatever was in that glass. The afternoon light caught her face, and I could see she wasn't joking. No twisted smile, no indication this was some sick attempt at dark humor. Her green eyes held the same calm focus I'd seen when she worked with patients, the professional detachment she'd developed after 15 years as an emergency room nurse. She'd always been the responsible one, the daughter who stayed local, who checked on Mom twice a week, who managed her medications and doctor appointments. Everyone in our family called Veronica the Angel of Mercy. Danny finished coloring his dinosaur and held it up proudly. "Uncle Marcus, look what I made." The name Marcus felt foreign in this moment, like someone else's identity I was borrowing. I forced a smile and told him it was beautiful, my voice sounding hollow and distant. He beamed and went back to his coloring book, selecting a bright red crayon for what appeared to be a volcano. Veronica sat down across from me, placing the glass on the coffee table between us. The liquid inside caught the light, and I could see tiny particles suspended in it, like sediment that hadn't quite dissolved. "Ricin," she said quietly, following my gaze to the glass. "Extracted from castor beans. Completely undetectable in standard toxicology screens unless you know exactly what to look for." Her voice remained steady, clinical, like she was explaining a medical procedure to a colleague. "The symptoms mimic organ failure perfectly. Progressive kidney damage, liver dysfunction, neurological decline. Most doctors would never suspect poisoning, especially when the patient has no known enemies and a loving daughter who brings homemade meals to the hospital every day." My phone sat on the side table, just 3 feet away, but it felt impossibly distant. Should I call the police? The hospital? How do you report your sister for poisoning your mother when your 4-year-old nephew is sitting right there, completely innocent and vulnerable? Danny was humming again, this time some tune from a cartoon, while carefully staying inside the lines of his coloring book. The normalcy of his presence made everything feel more surreal, like I was having some kind of breakdown and imagining this entire conversation. Veronica reached into her purse and pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. "This is the antidote. Well, not exactly an antidote, but a chelation therapy compound that can help flush the ricin from her system if administered within the next 6 hours." She set it next to the glass of poison, creating this impossible choice laid out on my coffee table. "Mom's been getting progressively smaller doses over the past month. I wanted it to look natural, like a slow decline rather than sudden poisoning, but she's stronger than I expected. Her body keeps fighting." The casual way she discussed our mother's murder attempt made my stomach churn. This was the same sister who'd cried at every family funeral, who'd spent her own money buying Christmas presents for underprivileged kids at the hospital, who'd worked double shifts to help pay for Dad's cancer treatment 5 years ago. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Either Veronica had suffered some kind of psychotic break, or I'd never really known her at all. Both possibilities terrified me in different ways. "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Danny looked up from his coloring, concerned by the change in my voice, but I gestured for him to keep working on his picture. He shrugged and went back to carefully coloring a tree green, tongue poking out slightly in concentration. The innocence of that gesture, surrounded by this conversation about murder and antidotes, created a jarring juxtaposition that made everything feel like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Veronica leaned back in her chair, finally showing some emotion. Her professional mask cracked slightly, revealing exhaustion and something that might have been guilt. "Mom's been talking about changing her will. She wants to leave everything to that new church she joined, the one with the young pastor who visits her every week." Her voice turned bitter. Pastor Williams convinced her that earthly possessions are keeping her from spiritual growth. She's planning to donate the house, the land, Dad's life insurance money, everything to his ministry. The inheritance. Of course, it came down to money. Our family's small farm was worth nearly $2 million due to urban sprawl creeping into the county. The property Dad had bought for $30,000 in 1975 now sat on prime development land. Mom had always said she'd divide everything equally between Veronica and me, but she'd become increasingly religious after Dad's death, especially after discovering this new church that made her feel needed and important. Pastor Williams was young, charismatic, and had a talent for making widows feel special. Danny finished his tree and started working on the grass, pressing the green crayon hard against the paper. "Mommy, when is Grandma coming home?" he asked, without looking up. The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Veronica's jaw tightened, and for the first time since this conversation started, she looked uncomfortable. "How do you explain to a 4-year-old that Grandma might not come home because Mommy has been slowly killing her for money?" "Soon, baby," Veronica said softly. "Grandma just needs to get better first." The lie came so easily, delivered with the same gentle tone she used when reassuring Danny about monsters under his bed. But this monster was real, sitting right across from me, wearing scrubs and looking like the devoted daughter everyone believed she was. The duality was staggering. She could shift between cold-blooded killer and loving mother in seconds, compartmentalizing these different aspects of her personality with frightening efficiency. I looked at the antidote sitting on my coffee table. 6 hours. That's all the time Mom had left unless I acted. But what action could I take that wouldn't destroy Danny's life? If I called the police, his mother would be arrested for attempted murder. He'd go into the foster system or live with relatives who'd always know his mom was a killer. If I said nothing, our mother would die, and Veronica would inherit everything she'd murdered for. Either choice would create casualties. "The timing is perfect," Veronica continued, seemingly unaware of my internal crisis. "Mom's been in the hospital for 3 weeks. The doctors are expecting her condition to worsen. When she passes, it'll be sad, but not suspicious. A middle-aged woman with organ failure succumbing to mysterious illness. I'll be the grieving daughter who did everything possible to save her. The entire hospital staff will testify to my dedication, all those late nights I spent by her bedside." She was right. Veronica had played her role perfectly. Every nurse at St. Mary's knew her as the daughter who brought homemade soup, who read to her mother, who slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair rather than go home. They'd seen her cry when the doctors delivered bad news, watched her coordinate care with different specialists, observed her gentle bedside manner. No one would ever suspect that the same hands providing comfort were also administering poison. Danny held up another finished page, this one showing a family of stick figures standing in front of a house. "That's me and Mommy and Uncle Marcus and Grandma," he explained proudly. The drawing was sweet and innocent, the kind of artwork that gets hung on refrigerators and treasured for years. But knowing what I now knew about his mother made the image feel ominous. The grandma figure stood slightly apart from the others, and I wondered if that was intentional or just the artistic choice of a 4-year-old. My hands were shaking as I reached for the antidote. The vial was warm from being in Veronica's purse, and I could feel the weight of the liquid inside. This small container held our mother's life, the difference between her dying tonight and potentially recovering. But using it meant confronting Veronica, meant exposing Danny to the truth about his mother, meant destroying our family in a completely different way. The choice felt impossible, like being asked to choose which limb to amputate. "You don't understand the full situation," Veronica said, noticing my movement toward the antidote. Her voice took on a harder edge, the professional mask slipping further. "Mom's church isn't just taking her money. Pastor Williams has been filling her head with ideas about Danny. She thinks I'm raising him wrong, that he needs more male influence and Christian discipline. She's been talking about seeking custody, claiming I'm an unfit mother because I work too much and don't take him to church regularly." The custody threat added another layer to this nightmare. Not only was Veronica potentially losing her inheritance, but she was also facing the possibility of losing her son. Mom had mentioned her concerns about Danny's upbringing, how she thought he needed more structure and religious education. I dismissed it as typical grandmother worry, not realizing it had escalated to legal threats. The desperation in Veronica's voice suggested this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about preserving her role as Danny's mother. "She hired a lawyer," Veronica continued, "filed preliminary paperwork claiming I'm negligent because Danny gets sick too often, because I let him watch inappropriate television, because I don't discipline him properly. The lawyer told her that with her financial resources and church support, she had a good chance of winning at least partial custody. Danny would spend summers with her, maybe even school years once he's older." I thought about Danny's frequent illnesses, the ear infections and stomach bugs that seemed to happen more often than normal for a child his age. Veronica always had explanations: daycare germs, seasonal allergies, normal childhood immune system development. But now I wondered if there was another cause, if the same hands that poisoned our mother had been experimenting on her son. The thought made me sick, but it would explain so much. The frequent doctor visits, Veronica's detailed knowledge of symptoms, her access to medications and medical supplies. Danny finished another page and stood up, stretching his small body. "I'm hungry, Uncle Marcus. Can we have snacks?" The request was so normal, so beautifully mundane, that it almost broke me. Here was this innocent child asking for goldfish crackers or apple slices, while his mother and I discussed murder and custody battles and family destruction. I wanted to scoop him up and run, take him somewhere safe where 4-year-olds worried about cartoon characters and playground games instead of adult horrors. "In a minute, buddy," I said, my voice still shaky. "Let Mommy and I finish talking first." He nodded and went back to coloring, apparently satisfied with that answer. Children have this amazing ability to accept adult conversations they don't understand, trusting that the grown-ups will handle whatever complicated things need handling. That trust felt like a crushing responsibility in this moment. Whatever I decided would shape the rest of Danny's life. Veronica stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my small backyard. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said quietly. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that her church was taking advantage of her grief, that Pastor Williams was manipulating her emotions to access her money, but she wouldn't listen. She said God was calling her to serve, that material possessions were distractions from spiritual growth. She actually laughed when I mentioned the inheritance, said money was the root of all evil. The irony was staggering. Our mother, trying to divest herself of material wealth, was being murdered by her daughter to preserve that same wealth. The very money Mom saw as spiritually corrupting had corrupted Veronica completely, turning her into something monstrous. Yet from Veronica's perspective, she was protecting her son's future, ensuring he'd have resources for college, medical care, opportunities that poverty might deny him. Her motivations were twisted, but not entirely selfish. "What about the Hippocratic Oath?" I asked. "First, do no harm? You're a nurse, Veronica. You've spent 15 years healing people, saving lives. How does that person reconcile with this?" I gestured at the poison and antidote still sitting on my coffee table. The question seemed to hit her hard because she turned away from the window, and for the first time since this conversation started, she looked genuinely troubled. "The oath is about doing no harm to patients," she said after a long pause. "Mom isn't my patient. She's my family, and family dynamics operate by different rules. Sometimes protecting one person requires sacrificing another. I've seen it countless times in the ER. Parents who choose which child gets the liver transplant, spouses who decide whether to continue life support, families who make impossible choices with no good outcomes. Her rationalization was chilling because it wasn't entirely wrong. Medical ethics did become complicated when family relationships were involved. Healthcare workers often had to compartmentalize their professional obligations and personal loyalties. But what Veronica was doing went far beyond ethical complexity. She'd crossed into criminal territory, using her medical knowledge as a weapon rather than a tool for healing. The same expertise that made her an excellent nurse made her a dangerous killer. Danny walked over to me and climbed into my lap, settling against my chest with the comfortable familiarity of countless babysitting sessions. He smelled like crayons and fruit snacks, and his small body was warm and solid against mine. "Uncle Marcus, you seem sad," he said, looking up at me with concerned brown eyes that were exactly like his mother's. "Are you okay?" The question pierced my heart because children are remarkably intuitive about adult emotions, even when they can't understand the causes. "I'm okay, buddy," I lied, smoothing his dark hair. "Just thinking about grown-up stuff." He nodded solemnly, as if grown-up stuff was a well-known category of mysterious but manageable problems. Then he snuggled closer, apparently satisfied that whatever was bothering me wasn't his fault or his responsibility to fix. The trust in that gesture was overwhelming. He believed completely that the adults in his life would protect him, handle the complicated things, make the right choices. Veronica was watching us, and her expression softened seeing Danny in my arms. For a moment, she looked like the sister I remembered, the one who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped with homework, who'd cried at my high school graduation. The transformation was jarring because it reminded me that people aren't entirely good or entirely evil. They're complex, capable of both tremendous love and terrible cruelty, sometimes simultaneously. Veronica genuinely loved her son while planning to murder her mother. "I've made mistakes," she admitted quietly. "The dosing has been inconsistent. Sometimes Danny got sick because I was testing different compounds, trying to find something undetectable that would work gradually. I never meant to hurt him, but children's systems are more sensitive than adults. What causes mild nausea in Mom could cause serious illness in a 4-year-old. I've been more careful lately, but the damage might already be done to his immune system." The confession hit me like a physical blow. She had been experimenting on Danny, using her own son as a test subject for murder weapons. The frequent illnesses, the unexplained fevers, the stomach problems that doctors attributed to normal childhood issues, all of it was caused by his mother systematically poisoning him. The betrayal was so profound I couldn't fully process it. How do you comprehend a parent deliberately harming their child while claiming to protect their future? Danny shifted in my lap, yawning as afternoon fatigue set in. "Can we watch cartoons now?" he asked sleepily. The request was so innocent, so completely normal, that it created cognitive dissonance with everything else happening. Here was a child who'd been unknowingly poisoned by his mother asking to watch television while she held his grandmother's life in her hands. The surreal quality of the situation felt like something from a psychological thriller, not real life. "Sure, buddy," I said, reaching for the remote with my free hand. I turned on a children's channel, and bright animated characters filled the screen, their cheerful voices providing a bizarre soundtrack to our conversation about murder and family destruction. Danny settled more comfortably against my chest, his breathing gradually slowing as the cartoons captured his attention. The normalcy of the moment felt like a thin veneer over an abyss. Veronica sat back down, her eyes fixed on the antidote. "I know what you're thinking," she said. "That I'm a monster, that I've violated every principle of motherhood and medicine. You're not wrong. But I'm also Danny's only protection against a system that would tear him away from everything he knows and put him with a grandmother who sees him as a project to be fixed rather than a child to be loved." She wasn't entirely wrong about Mom's attitude toward Danny. Since becoming involved with Pastor Williams's church, Mom had become increasingly critical of modern parenting methods. She thought children needed more discipline, more religious education, less exposure to secular influences. Her generation believed in strict authority structures and conformity to traditional roles. Danny, with his creativity and sensitivity, wouldn't thrive in that environment. He'd be molded into something he wasn't. "There's another option," I said carefully, still holding Danny as he watched cartoons. "What if I took the antidote to the hospital now, saved Mom's life, but also talked to her about the custody issue? Explained your concerns, helped her understand that taking Danny away would hurt him more than help him? Maybe we could find a compromise that doesn't involve anyone dying or going to prison." Veronica shook her head. "You don't know how far this has gone. Pastor Williams has convinced her that I'm spiritually corrupted, that Danny needs to be rescued from my influence. She's not interested in compromise. In her mind, this is a holy mission to save her grandson's soul. There's no reasoning with religious fanaticism, especially when it's reinforced by a charismatic leader who benefits financially from her devotion." The clock on my wall showed 4:30 p.m. If Veronica was right about the 6-hour window, Mom had until 10:30 p.m. before the antidote would be useless. But hospitals had evening visiting hours until 8 p.m., which meant I could get the antidote to her by then, if I decided to act. The time pressure was intentional, I realized. Veronica had calculated this conversation carefully, giving me just enough time to make a choice, but not enough to overthink it or find alternative solutions. Danny had fallen asleep in my lap, his small body completely relaxed and trusting. His breathing was steady and peaceful, and one small hand clutched my shirt. Looking at him, I understood Veronica's desperation more clearly. This innocent child had already been harmed by her choices, but he was also the motivation behind them. She was trying to protect his future, even while destroying his present. The tragedy was that her methods had made the situation worse, not better. "What happens if I choose to save Mom?" I asked quietly, not wanting to wake Danny. "You've already confessed to attempted murder. I can't pretend this conversation never happened. But I also can't destroy Danny's life by reporting his mother to police. So what's the endgame here? How does this resolve without catastrophic damage to everyone involved?" Veronica considered the question seriously, her medical training evident in how she approached complex problems. "If Mom recovers, she'll continue with the custody proceedings. She has financial resources and community support. I have a demanding job and a history of Danny's frequent illnesses that could be twisted into evidence of neglect. The custody battle would be brutal and expensive, probably lasting years. Danny would be caught in the middle, psychologically damaged by the conflict." She was painting a grim picture, but it wasn't necessarily inaccurate. Family court proceedings could indeed be traumatic for children, especially when grandparents challenged parental fitness. The legal system often prioritized stability and resources over emotional bonds, and Mom's financial advantage would be significant. Danny could end up in a situation where his primary caregiver was someone who saw him as a spiritual project rather than a beloved grandson. "But if Mom dies," Veronica continued, "the custody threat disappears. Danny inherits financial security through me, and we can build a life without constant fear of legal interference. Yes, I'll carry the guilt forever, but Danny will be safe and loved. Sometimes protecting someone you love requires making terrible choices and living with the consequences." The utilitarian logic was seductive but horrifying. One death to prevent years of family destruction and childhood trauma. From a purely analytical perspective, Veronica's argument had merit. But murder was murder, regardless of the rationalization. And Danny was already damaged by her choices, his immune system compromised by experimental poisoning, his psychological development affected by his mother's deception and manipulation. Danny stirred in my lap, mumbling something incoherent before settling back into sleep. His face was peaceful, unmarked by the adult horrors surrounding him. Whatever choice I made would shape his entire future. If I saved Mom and Veronica went to prison, he'd grow up knowing his mother was a killer. If I let Mom die and said nothing, he'd grow up believing his grandmother died of natural causes while living off blood money. Neither option offered true innocence. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across my living room. The domestic scene, Child asleep in uncle's arms while mother watched cartoons, masked the life and death drama playing out underneath. Veronica had created this impossible situation where every choice led to tragedy. She'd weaponized family love, using Danny's welfare as both motivation and shield for her crimes. The manipulation was masterful and terrifying. "I need to know something," I said, studying Veronica's face carefully. "If I choose to let Mom die, what guarantee do I have that this stops here? That you won't decide Danny's teachers are too influential, or his friends' parents are problematic, or some future threat requires similar solutions? How do I know this isn't just the beginning of a pattern where you eliminate obstacles through murder?" The question clearly bothered her because she looked away, focusing on the television screen where animated characters were learning lessons about friendship and cooperation. The irony wasn't lost on me that children's programming promoted values like honesty and kindness while we discussed homicide. Danny absorbed these messages unconsciously while sleeping, his developing moral framework shaped by shows that emphasized treating others with respect and solving problems peacefully. "This is different," Veronica finally said. Mom's threat was existential, immediate, and legal. She had the power to actually take Danny away from me. Future problems would be handled through normal means, talking to teachers, changing schools if necessary, monitoring friendships appropriately. "I'm not a serial killer, Marcus. I'm a mother protecting her child from a specific, imminent threat that couldn't be resolved any other way." But that's what every killer probably told themselves, that their circumstances were unique, their victim deserving, their methods justified by extraordinary conditions. Veronica had already crossed the line from healer to killer, from mother to child abuser. She'd proven capable of systematic deception, long-term planning, and callous disregard for collateral damage. What other imminent threats might she identify in the future? Danny's breathing changed, becoming lighter as he began to wake up. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then finding my face and smiling with sleepy contentment. "Did I miss the good part?" he asked, looking at the television where characters were solving some cartoon crisis through teamwork and communication. The innocence of his question, the assumption that cartoon conflicts had good parts worth seeing, highlighted how far removed his reality was from the adult world of impossible choices and moral compromise. "The good part is still coming," I told him, and realized I was talking about more than cartoons. Whatever decision I made would determine whether there could be any good parts in Danny's future. Could a child raised by a mother who murdered his grandmother ever truly have a normal, healthy life? Could he grow up without the psychological scars of family secrets and blood money? The questions had no clear answers. Veronica checked her watch, a subtle reminder of the time pressure she'd created. "I know this is overwhelming," she said, her voice gentler now, more like the sister I remembered. "But waiting won't make it easier. Every minute that passes is another minute Mom suffers in that hospital bed, her organs shutting down, her mind becoming more confused. If you're going to save her, you need to decide soon. And if you're not, then you need to make peace with that choice." The manipulation in her words was subtle but clear. By describing Mom's suffering, she was both creating urgency and testing my resolve. If I truly intended to let Mom die, then her current pain was irrelevant, because it would end soon anyway. But if I was leaning towards saving her, then every delay caused unnecessary suffering. Veronica was using empathy as a weapon, forcing me to confront the consequences of indecision. Danny sat up in my lap, stretching his small arms and yawning. "I'm still hungry," he announced, apparently having forgotten his earlier snack request in the comfort of his nap. The statement was so perfectly normal, so beautifully mundane, that it almost broke my heart. Children's needs were simple and immediate: food when hungry, sleep when tired, comfort when scared. The adult world of moral complexity and impossible choices existed in a different universe from his reality of basic needs and innocent trust. "Let's get you something to eat," I said, standing up with Danny still in my arms. He was getting too big to carry easily, but I wasn't ready to let go of the physical comfort of holding him close. His solid warmth against my chest was the only real thing in a conversation that felt increasingly surreal. Whatever happened with Mom and Veronica, Danny would need protection and love and stability. That responsibility felt heavier than his physical weight. I carried him to the kitchen, Veronica following behind us. Danny pointed to the refrigerator, where I kept juice boxes and string cheese specifically for his visits. "Can I have the apple juice?" he asked politely, having been taught to use his manners even when making simple requests. The please and thank you habits were so ingrained that he maintained them even when tired and confused about why the adults were acting strangely. Good parenting had given him that foundation, which made Veronica's other choices even more tragic. As I opened the refrigerator, I noticed Danny's artwork covering the front door, held up by colorful magnets. Pictures of stick figure families, crayon rainbows, handprint turkeys from last Thanksgiving. All the evidence of a loved child, carefully preserved and displayed. Veronica did love her son genuinely, which made her willingness to harm him for his supposed protection even more psychologically complex. People weren't simple monsters or saints. They were capable of simultaneous love and cruelty. Danny sat at my kitchen table, swinging his legs while drinking apple juice through a straw. The scene was domestic and comfortable like thousands of other babysitting moments we'd shared over the years. But the knowledge of what his mother had done, what she was asking me to accept, cast everything in a different light. How many other seemingly normal family moments had occurred while Veronica planned murder? How many times had she hugged Danny goodnight before going to mix another dose of poison? "I need to use the bathroom," Veronica said, heading toward my hallway. The statement seemed casual, but I wondered if she was giving me a moment alone with Danny, time to process the situation without her direct influence. Or maybe she was checking her phone, coordinating some other aspect of her plan that I wasn't aware of. After this conversation, I'd never be able to take her casual statements at face value again. Every action would carry potential hidden meanings. Danny finished his juice box and looked at me expectantly. "Can we play a game now?" he asked. The request was so normal, so beautifully innocent that I almost said yes automatically. But playing games while his grandmother died and his mother planned murder felt obscene, like maintaining polite conversation during an execution. Yet Danny needed normalcy, needed the comfort of familiar routines and uncle who played games and gave hugs and made everything feel safe. "What kind of game?" I asked, sitting down across from him at the table. He launched into an explanation of some elaborate scenario involving dinosaurs and spaceships, his hands gesturing excitedly as he described the rules. His imagination was vivid and complex, spinning detailed narratives from simple toys and basic concepts. That creativity would be either nurtured or crushed depending on the choices I made in the next few hours. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. Veronica returned from the bathroom, her expression unreadable. She'd freshened her lipstick and smoothed her hair, small vanity gestures that seemed jarring given our conversation about murder and family destruction. But maybe maintaining normal appearances was part of her psychological survival mechanism, a way of compartmentalizing the different aspects of her identity. The competent nurse, the loving mother, and the calculating killer could coexist if she maintained careful boundaries between them. "We should probably head home soon," she said to Danny, who immediately protested that he wasn't ready to leave yet. The exchange was perfectly normal, the eternal negotiation between parent and child about transitions and timing. But knowing what I now knew about Veronica made even these mundane interactions feel sinister. Was she always manipulating Danny? Or did genuine maternal love coexist with her willingness to harm him for his supposed benefit? Danny launched into bargaining mode, asking for 5 more minutes, then 10 more minutes, then just enough time to finish his current coloring page. Veronica negotiated patiently, showing the kind of gentle firmness that child development experts recommended. She was, by most measures, a good mother despite being a poisoner and potential killer. The contradiction was so profound, I struggled to hold both truths simultaneously in my mind. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with the decision, "maybe Danny could have a sleepover tonight. We haven't done that in a while and I don't have work tomorrow." The suggestion was spontaneous, but it felt important to give myself more time to think, to separate Danny from his mother while I processed this impossible situation. If Veronica was planning something beyond Mom's death, if there were other aspects to her plan I didn't understand, then having Danny with me might provide some protection. Danny's face lit up with excitement. "Really? Can I, Mom? Please?" He turned to Veronica with the kind of hopeful expression that was impossible to resist under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances, and I watched Veronica's face carefully to see how she'd respond. Would she agree and risk me having more time to think? Would she refuse and potentially trigger Danny's suspicion about why this normal request was being denied? "I suppose that would be okay," Veronica said after a moment's hesitation. "But you'll need pajamas and your toothbrush. And Uncle Marcus, you'll need to give him his vitamins before bed. The bottle is in my purse." She reached for her bag, and I wondered what those vitamins actually contained. Given everything she'd admitted, I wasn't willing to trust any medication she provided for her son. The sleepover would give me time to think, but it would also put Danny's immediate health in my hands. Danny cheered and ran to look out the window at my backyard, already making plans for our evening together. "Can we have pizza? And watch movies? And tell ghost stories?" The questions tumbled out in his excitement, and I found myself smiling despite everything. His joy was infectious, a reminder that children could find happiness in simple things like sleepovers and pizza dinners. Whatever choices I made, I wanted to preserve that capacity for innocent pleasure as much as possible. Veronica handed me a small bottle of what looked like standard children's vitamins, but I palmed it without really looking, planning to research the contents later. "Just one at bedtime," she said. "He's been fighting off a cold, so his immune system needs the extra support." The explanation sounded plausible, but after her confessions, I couldn't trust anything she said about Danny's health or medication needs. The cold could be another result of her experimentation. As Veronica prepared to leave, I walked her to the door while Danny continued planning our sleepover activities. "I'll call you later," she said quietly, her hand on the doorknob. "After you've had time to think about everything we discussed. This doesn't have to be complicated, Marcus. We both want what's best for Danny, and sometimes that requires making difficult choices." The euphemism was chilling, reducing murder to a difficult choice, in service of child welfare. What if I can't live with either choice? I asked. What if saving Mom destroys Danny's childhood and letting her die destroys my soul? Some decisions don't have acceptable outcomes, only different kinds of damage. The question seemed to catch her off guard because she paused with her hand on the door, considering how to respond. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and I saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. Then you choose the damage you can live with, she said finally. The damage that serves the greater good, even if it's not perfect. Paralysis isn't protection, Marcus. Sometimes inaction is the worst choice of all. She opened the door, then turned back one more time. I'll be at home tonight, if you need to talk. But remember, the window for the antidote closes at 10:30. After that, the choice is made regardless of what we decide. After she left, I stood in my doorway watching her drive away, while Danny continued making sleepover plans in the background. The ordinariness of the scene, sister leaving after dropping off her son for babysitting, masked the extraordinary crisis underneath. My neighbors probably saw a normal family interaction, not realizing they'd witnessed a confession to attempted murder and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. The gap between appearance and reality felt vast and unbridgeable. Danny ran up and hugged my legs, his small arms wrapping around me with complete trust and affection. This is going to be the best sleepover ever, he declared with 4-year-old certainty that the evening held nothing but wonderful possibilities. His enthusiasm was a gift, a reminder that some things remained pure despite the adult corruption surrounding them. Whatever happened with Mom and Veronica, I would protect that innocence as much as possible. I looked at the vitamin bottle in my hand, then at Danny's trusting face, then at my phone sitting on the counter where I could call the hospital, the police, or social services. Each option led to different forms of damage and different kinds of survival. Veronica was right that paralysis wasn't protection, but she was wrong about the binary nature of the choice. There had to be a third option, some way to save Mom without destroying Danny, some path through this crisis that didn't require sacrificing one person to protect another. The afternoon was fading into evening, and somewhere across town our mother lay in a hospital bed while her organs slowly failed from poison her daughter had administered. In 6 hours, the antidote would be useless, and she would die unless I acted. But action meant consequences I couldn't fully predict or control. The weight of choice felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried, more complex than any decision I'd ever faced. Whatever I decided would reshape not just our family, but the very concept of justice, mercy, and protection. Danny tugged on my shirt, bringing me back to the present moment. Uncle Marcus, can we order pizza now? I'm really hungry, and I want pepperoni and cheese, but not those little green things. His priorities were beautifully simple, focused on immediate needs and preferences rather than moral complexity and impossible choices. That clarity was exactly what I needed to remember as I faced the hardest decision of my life. Sometimes the right choice wasn't about complex ethical calculations, but about protecting the innocent, no matter the cost to yourself. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. I need to report an attempted murder. My sister has been poisoning our mother, and I have evidence. Danny looked up at me with curious eyes, not understanding the significance, but trusting that Uncle Marcus was handling grown-up business that would somehow result in pizza and cartoons and bedtime stories. That trust was the only compass I needed to navigate the darkness ahead. Comment your thoughts below. I love to read your comments.